What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Comedy of Business podcast. I'm your host, Brian McTurnell. I'm super excited that you guys are with me here on this journey. This is my first ever podcast, so we will start learning together. What I figure we'll do is we'll do a brief bio of the time that I've spent in customer service as far as working with business, and then we'll go through kind of a timeline of how the podcast is going to work. Which is always fluid, and we might be changing it because, like I said, I don't really know what I'm doing. This is the first time that I've ever done this, so we'll learn together. So, quick bio: been in business, different customer service roles for probably 25-ish years. I started out at the young age of 15 at a local theme park, and then I moved into theme park leadership. Spent the majority of my time there. I have worked in car sales for a brief amount of time. The last 10 years or so, I have been the youth director of my church. I own a donut shop locally here in Gloucester, Virginia, and I have recently become the practice manager of a veterinary hospital also here in Gloucester. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say names of businesses and things like that. So rather than get sued, we'll just kind of leave those out. So I spent a decent amount of time with customers. I mean, you got 40,000 at a theme park. There's always happy ones. There's always sad ones. When you own your own business, of course, you get praise on social media. Also, sometimes, people aren't so excited. So there's a lot of ups and downs in the customer service world and the business world. Some of them are serious. Some of them are funny. The ones I really want to focus on are kind of the funny ones, to keep the podcast lighthearted and fun. I also want it to be relatable. We all have that customer story of, the person that did something silly or they were just upset for no reason at all. Like you couldn't please this person. And so those are the types of things that I want to get into on this podcast. It might be educational sometimes, but if you're looking to take your business to become a Fortune 500, this is probably not where you're going to get the information to do that. But we'd love for you to stick around either way. So the majority of the stories are going to come from either my experience or from your experience. So if you have a funny story that comes from customer service, you dealing with a business, whether you're the customer or the person that is dealing with the issue, please send those in to comedyofbusiness@gmail.com. You can also say that you want to be a guest on the show. I am also looking for a co-host for the show. So please send me any of that stuff. You guys got any names of somebody that's cheap to be a co-host? I would love to do that as well. Also, you can leave comments on social media, YouTube, any of that stuff. You can leave nice comments. You can leave comments that are like, hey, you should try this, or you can also leave your funny stories in there as well. So a brief overview of how it's going to go is that hopefully next week we'll have comments. So we'll start out by reading some of those comments that you guys put out there on social media. Then I know that I said it wouldn't be educational, but I do want to go through some words that I've learned from someone from the Generation Z. They have some really funny words. And so I have a list of like 100 words. And what I'm thinking we do is that I'll read a word for the first time, and then I will try to guess what the word means. And then we'll look it up together just to see how far off I was on the word. When we have co-hosts or guests, obviously we'll ask them as well what they believe that the word means. I just think some of these words are hilarious. And if you are working with the younger generation, like when I work with youth kids, you do hear a lot of these things and it's pretty funny. But there's a lot of them that I don't understand. So it'll be interesting. Also, after we do that, then we'll get into our main story of the week. This week's story comes from my personal experience until I get some from you guys or co-hosts or special guests. I guess that's where they'll come from. So if you want to hear your story, again, email it in to comedyofbusiness@gmail or in the comments. So what we'll do is we'll get started with our first word this week. I kind of cheated because I think this one's funny and it's a good one to start with. I already knew what the definition of this one was because of one of my favorite 15-year-olds, Issa. So the word of this week is dog water. I guess technically that's a phrase, but so what I thought dog water meant was that it was something bad or gross, because who wants to drink out of their dog bowl? But there is an actual definition on the internet, which I think is hilarious. It says dog water is a derogatory term implying that something is of very low quality, similar to the literal dog water. And then it says in parentheses, water left out for dogs, which is often stagnant and unappealing. I think this definition is fantastic. Like, not only does it explain it like it's coming from straight out of a dictionary, but then it has to explain to us that it is unappealing or that dog water is water that's left out for dogs. Like, where do they come up with this stuff? I think it is so funny. I guess this is from the kids, after the kids that were eating Tide Pods. So I guess we're getting better, but still hilarious. Again, dog water, unappealing or gross. So if you want to use that with your children, I would highly suggest that you do that. Maybe I'll start adding, using it in a sentence. Like, your room looks like dog water, or that cup that you left over there looks like dog water. Things like that. So we'll see what happens. So there you are, your first Gen Z word of the podcast. All right, so we'll get into our first story. Like I said, I don't know that I'm allowed to use brand names. So I went to some very large hardware stores. One of them, the people wear red vests, and one of them, people wear orange aprons. So pretty large stores. I'm guessing that you could probably figure out where those places were in our story today. So I will call them red store and orange store. And hopefully you guys will understand. If you don't, then you've probably never picked up a hammer before. So we can also talk about that later. All right. So my first story is that I'm building a deck at my house. And, usually people talk about building a deck and it's like, a little deck or whatever. This thing's huge. And if I didn't have my friend Brian, I want to use air quotes on friend, helping me, then it would have never gotten started, most likely. But this deck is like overbuilt. It's definitely been overpriced, but that's okay because it's going to last a really long time. But anyways, he does most of the work. He does all the fun stuff, and I get sent to either the red store or the orange store or our local lumber yard to pick up stuff. So I was tasked with going to buy this metal bracket at the red store. And so I go to the red store and I cannot find where they have these brackets. So, like a normal person, I pull it up on the app rather than asking anybody, and it says they have 35 of these things in stock, but and then show me where the aisle is. So I go to the aisle, and sure enough, there it is. And it says that it is $35.49 or something. And I'm like, okay, but on the app it says it's $23.40 or whatever. So quite a bit of difference, $11. It's a decent amount of money. So I'm like, no problem. I've been to this red store before, almost said the name, and they have matched things before. So I'm like, no problem. Maybe it's a mistake. Somebody forgot to put the sticker on here or, whatever. Lots of stuff happened. So I take the thing up front and I scan it and it still says 35, whatever. And the little helpful lady there at the self checkout, she says, "Sir, can I help you?" And I'm like, "Yes, ma'am, you can." And she's like, "How can I help you?" And I said, "Well, this says it's $35, but on your website it's 23." whatever. And she says, "Sir, is that our website?" And I probably had a look on my face like, who else's website would I show you, lady? But I said, "Yes, ma'am, it is." And she goes, "Oh, sir, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we don't match our own website." How do you not match your own website? Is my question. Like, and it wasn't something that was like an online exclusive. It was just a normal, metal bracket for a post. And so I'm like, so you're telling me, ma'am, that I can leave this with you. You'll put it back on the shelf. I can go outside, add this to my cart. Then somebody else has to go grab it off the shelf, bring it back to the front, and then that's how I save $11. And she's like, "Yes, sir." And I'm like, "Okay, so if you don't match your website, whose website do you match?" And she said, "Well, our competitors." And I'm like, "So you'll match your competitor's website, but you're, gonna haggle with somebody in your store because they picked it up off the shelf versus ordering it online?" And she's like, "Yeah, sir, I'm sorry. I think it's dumb too." Which, first of all, you should never say that something that your company does is dumb because you're a, brand ambassador for that company. But, in this case, I agree. So I give the lady all the things and I'm like, "Well, you know what? Let me look on Home Depot's website." Oh, I said the name. Sorry. We'll scratch that from the record, maybe. So I'll look on the Orange People's website. And so I look on there and they have it for 23, 20, whatever. And so I show it to the lady. I'm like, "Look, this is the exact same thing." She goes, "I'm sorry, sir. Theirs comes in a box. So it's not the exact same item." And so if you look at the item number, it was one number different. And she's like, "Sorry, we only match like items." So she's like, "Well, would you still like to buy this?" And I'm like, "No, ma'am, I don't want to buy this or the $1,000 of other things that I'm holding here." So I take my pride and I walk out of the red store and I go to the orange store and I buy everything for about $90 cheaper. And so I was just sitting there thinking, I'm like, this is crazy that a company this big would have such a silly um, rule, because she was adamant that nobody would be able to help me to change it. And so rather than sit there for an hour to be able to save my $11, I drove a mile and a half down the road and ended up saving about $90. So the story worked out good for me. And does the red store really care about my $1,000? Probably not. But what a terrible business practice. Will that cause me to not go to the red store anymore? Absolutely not. I still love a lot of the products that they have there. I feel like that's how they trick you. The red one has some stuff, the orange one has some stuff. So then you use both. Maybe they're in cahoots together. Maybe we'll dig into that on another episode. That's my funny story for this week. I'd like to leave you guys with a little bit of good advice. I call it good advice at the end of each podcast. So today's is to be nice to customers. It doesn't cost you anything, but it makes all the difference. You can go to the same place in two different locations and have completely different experiences just by the person that makes a difference by being nice, or they make small talk with you, or, just comment on something, tell people you hope they have a great day, things like that. Make all the difference. It costs nothing, but makes a world of difference, like I said before. So, I'd just like to end the podcast with that. Hoping to keep it between 15 and 30 minutes. We just hit 15 minutes, almost 16 minutes. So perfect. Once again, thank you guys so much for hanging out all the way through the podcast. Leave comments, things like that. So we have more stuff to talk about next week, and I will see you then. All right. Have a good week.